Greetings. Let us talk about drying and storage of the endoscope. This is the last step, and this is a critical step, and you want to avoid any moisture in the scope channels, either in the scope channels or outside, because moisture allows the bacteria to grow and form a biofilm. So that is dangerous. So you may have done all the work right, and if you don't take time to dry up the scope, and I mean to bone dry the scope, your efforts are basically gone waste. So how do we go about drying and storing the scope? So you start by wearing a fresh PPE, and then remove the scope from the cart and place it on a disposable cloth, and after that you have a couple of options. You can either go with manual drying or an automated drying. Let's talk about manual drying. So in manual drying, you force air to the suction and air water valves. You want to look at the manufacturer's instructions for use and figure out how much of air is assigned for a particular scope. Too much of air can damage the scope. The next step is, how long should you do this? You should do it for a minimum of 10 minutes. And as you do this, you place a finger over the biopsy channel to prevent air from escaping. The reason 10 minutes is when they looked into the channels with a boroscope, they found that anything below 10 minutes, they could see water droplets. So you have to take time, at least 10 minutes, for drying up the channels of the endoscope. If you go the route of automated drying, you basically hook up the air water suction channels on the scope control head and the suction outlet of the umbilical cord to the machine, and then you turn on the machine. It will force air through all the channels, and the machine is programmed to allow the air to flow through these channels for at least 10 minutes, because we know that 10 minutes would allow the tubings to be dry. So that is very important to do this, and you could attach two scopes so that in one 10-minute cycle you could actually clean and dry two scopes. After you have done this, you take the scope, you dry the exterior of the scope with a lint-free cloth, and then before you hang the scope, you put the caps, adapters in a mesh bag and attach that bag to the control section of the scope. One thing you should not do is reattach the caps and adapters to the scope, because they would prevent the liquid from draining out if there is anything left, and would facilitate the formation of biofilm. So as you can see here, every step that is planned is to keep the endoscope dry. So once you've attached all the reusable, removable parts placed in a mesh bag and attached to the scope, you hang the scope in the drying cabinet vertically. The distal tip and the light guide should point downwards. The reason why it should point downwards is the gravity would allow, if there is any fluid in there, to come out. You make sure there are no kinks or areas where water can pool inside the scope. You make sure that the angulation locks are open. You make sure that the storage area has good ventilation. And you should monitor the temperature and humidity of the storage cabinet. Some facilities do have the storage cabinets where they can flush air continuously, and that has been shown to be very useful, because by continuous flow of air, that is air flushed through the channels, you attach tubing to each of those biopsy and air water channels as well as the biopsy port, and there is a continuous airflow that keeps these channels dry. The goal is to keep the scope dry to prevent any biofilm development. So, after you put in there, before you take the scope, you should check if the scope has exceeded the expiration date while in storage. And if that happened, say for example, you didn't use a particular scope for several weeks, you may need to reprocess it again. The expiration date will be set by each endoscopy unit, and when you reprocess, you start again with the leak testing and then go through the whole step. So, we have talked about how to dry the scope and take all the precautions, forcing the air for 10 minutes and make sure the scope is dry. You hang the scope vertically so that if there is any water left, it will dry, and then you need to think about the expiration date of the scope in the storage area. Thank you.